When I told my daughter I might have to sell the duplex, she did not ask where I would live. She did not ask whether I had enough money for groceries, whether the roof was leaking again, or whether I had finally gotten scared living alone downstairs since her mother died. Melissa leaned back in the kitchen chair, looked at the old pine cabinets she had complained about since she was 16, and said, "Good. Then we can finally do this the easy way." She caught herself almost at once. Her mouth tightened, and she reached across the table as though touching my wrist could pull the words back into her. "Dad, that came out wrong. I only mean you shouldn't have to carry this place by yourself anymore. Aaron and I have been worried about you." My son Aaron had never said anything of the kind, but I let that pass. I watched my daughter arrange concern on her face and begin speaking quickly about rising property taxes, insurance premiums, and the stairs to the upstairs apartment. She had numbers ready. She knew what similar buildings had sold for. She knew a private investor who could move quickly and spare me the trouble of listing the place. She even knew, within $5,000, how much equity I had left after the small loan I had taken 12 years earlier to replace the plumbing. That was when the cold feeling I had carried for 3 days settled into certainty. I was not behind on the mortgage. I was not facing foreclosure. My pension from the city covered my bills, the upstairs rent covered most of the property expenses, and I had enough in savings to live carefully without asking either of my children for a dime. I had told Melissa I was in trouble because the credit union had called me the previous Tuesday about an online request for a $180,000 home equity line tied to my Social Security number and the Clay Street address. The request had not gone far enough to release money, but it had gone far enough for someone to upload a copy of my driver's license, list the duplex as collateral, and order a preliminary property review. Only 2 people had access to the fireproof box where I kept copies of my identification after my cataract surgery the year before. One was Melissa, who had helped organize my paperwork while I could not read small print. The other was Aaron, who had driven me to the surgery and spent the night on my couch because the doctor said I should not be alone. I did not want to believe either of them had used my information, and I did not want to accuse one based on a bank clerk's phone call. So I decided to tell them both the same thing and watch what they did next. My name is Frank Delaney. I was 68 that fall, retired after 36 years repairing city buses in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The duplex was not a mansion, and I was not a rich man. It was a broad, tired brick building with 2 porches, crooked floors, and a maple tree that dropped enough leaves every October to bury a small car. My wife Ruth and I bought it in 1988, when the upstairs windows were boarded, and the downstairs bathroom had a hole where the tub should have been. We lived in 3 rooms while we rebuilt the rest with borrowed tools and whatever money was left after diapers. Melissa learned to walk across unfinished oak flooring. Aaron was born after we had finally installed heat upstairs. Ruth kept every receipt in labeled envelopes and could tell you what we paid for a hinge 15 years after we bought it. She died 5 years before this story began, and after that, the building became more than property to me. It was the last place where her decisions still lived in the walls. Melissa was 45 and owned a kitchen design studio on the north side. She had always been bright, persuasive, and impatient with anything that did not move at the speed she expected. Aaron was 41, divorced, and worked heating and air conditioning calls all over Allen County. He had made mistakes of his own, including a marriage he stayed in too long and a truck he could not afford, but he had a habit of showing up with tools before anyone asked. I loved them differently because they were different people, but until that week, I believed I trusted them equally. At the kitchen table, Melissa kept talking until she had almost repaired the damage of that first sentence. She said she could come back the next morning with a few options. I told her I would appreciate that. At the door, she hugged me longer than usual and said, "Don't call anyone yet, Dad. Let me protect you from making a rushed decision." After she drove away, I called Aaron and gave him the same story. I told him the insurance increase, the roof repairs, and a bad investment had left me unable to keep the duplex. There was a pause on his end. Then he asked, "Are you safe right now?" I said I was. He asked whether the utilities were current. I said they were. Then he said, "Don't sign anything. Don't promise anybody anything. And don't feel embarrassed. I can be there after my last service call." He did not ask what the building was worth. He did not ask what I had in savings. He asked whether there was food in the refrigerator. That difference should have relieved me. Instead, it made me more afraid of what Melissa might bring back in the morning. Aaron arrived a little after 7 that evening, carrying a canvas tool bag and 2 grocery sacks. He had come straight from a furnace replacement in New Haven, and there was dust on the knees of his work pants. He put soup, bread, eggs, and coffee on the counter without making a ceremony of it, then asked to see the bills I claimed I could not manage. I had prepared copies that showed a real insurance increase, a roof estimate, and a fictional investment loss large enough to create pressure without making me sound reckless. Aaron sat at the table with a pencil, read every page twice, and asked questions that were practical rather than suspicious. Could the upstairs rent be adjusted when the current lease ended? Had I applied for the senior property tax deduction? Was the roof actually failing, or had one contractor looked at old shingles and smelled an easy sale? When I told him the estimate was $22,000, he let out a low whistle and said, "That number has fishing boat written all over it." Then he went outside with a flashlight, climbed the rear ladder, and spent 30 minutes on the roof while a cold drizzle worked through his jacket. He came down with wet hair and 2 photographs, showing that most of the damage was limited to a section near the chimney. "It needs work," he said, "but it doesn't need 22 grand worth of work. I can patch it for winter, and we'll get 3 bids in spring." I asked what he thought I should do about selling. He looked at me as though the question itself bothered him. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I said, "I wanted to stay if I could." He nodded. "Then the plan starts there." He never mentioned inheriting the building. He never said I should transfer it to him. Before he left, he wrote the name of a non-profit housing counselor on the back of an envelope and made me promise to call before speaking to a realtor. Then, as he was putting on his coat, he noticed the red property tax folder on the sideboard. His face changed for half a second. It was small, but I saw it. I asked if something was wrong. He said no and left. Afterward, I opened the folder and discovered a receipt I had not placed there. The second installment of the year's property tax, $1,248, had been paid 2 months earlier from an account I did not recognize. I had believed my automatic payment covered it, but the credit union had changed systems and rejected the transfer. Aaron must have found the notice when he picked up my mail during a weekend I spent visiting Ruth's sister in Kentucky. He had paid it and said nothing. I called him. At first he tried to act as if he did not know what I was talking about. When I pressed him, he said, "You were dealing with Aunt Carol's surgery, and I didn't want you driving home worried about a deadline. I planned to tell you when you got back, but then it felt like I'd make it sound bigger than it was." I told him $1,200 was big for a man paying child support and rent. He said, "I had overtime. You would have done it for me." I asked why he had not let me repay him. His answer was simple: "Because I knew you would." That receipt told me almost everything I needed to know about Aaron, but it did not tell me who had made the loan request. Melissa returned at 9 the next morning with a leather portfolio and 2 cups of coffee from a place where 1 drink cost more than Ruth and I used to spend on breakfast. She spread papers across my table with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed the order. The first sheet was a market analysis, showing the duplex valued between $340,000 and $380,000. The second described an offer from an investment company called North Ridge Residential Holdings. The offer was $290,000 in cash, no inspection, closing in 10 days. The third was titled Temporary Property Management Authorization. Melissa explained that it would allow her to negotiate for me because stress could make older people vulnerable to bad decisions. I asked who owned North Ridge. She said it was a local group she knew through work. I asked for the names of the members. She said that did not matter, because the company would use a closing attorney. Then she slid the final document toward me. It was not a management authorization. It was a durable financial power of attorney, broad enough to let her open credit accounts, manage real estate, and speak to lenders in my name. My driver's license number was already typed into it. My full social security number appeared on an attached identity verification page. Melissa kept her finger over the signature line and said, "This just lets me stop the bleeding before someone else takes advantage of you." I looked at the numbers and asked, "How did you get my social security number?" She answered too quickly, "You gave it to me after your surgery." I said I did not remember giving her permission to keep it. She smiled without warmth and said, "Dad, I'm your daughter. I'm trying to keep you from becoming one of those people who loses everything because they're too proud to accept help." I told her I wanted the weekend to think. For the first time, her calm slipped. "There may not be a weekend," she said. "The buyer can move on another property." I asked why a buyer I had never contacted was waiting on my answer. She gathered the papers, leaving only the unsigned power of attorney, and said, "Because I asked them to. You told me you needed help." Then she added, "Please don't involve Aaron. He means well, but he doesn't understand money." She left the coffee untouched. 20 minutes later, the credit union called again. The loan officer had received a new email asking whether a signed power of attorney would be enough to continue the home equity application. The sender had used an address built from my name, but it was not mine. That was the moment suspicion stopped being a family discomfort and became something with a paper trail. I drove to the credit union before lunch with the unsigned documents in a grocery bag because I did not own a briefcase and refused to carry Melissa's leather portfolio like it belonged to me. The branch manager, a woman named Denise Carter, took me into a small office and closed the door. She showed me the preliminary application but would not print every page until the fraud department approved it. The contact telephone number belonged to Melissa's studio. The email address used my first initial and last name with a number added at the end. The requested funds were described as capital for property stabilization and renovation, but the deposit account listed on the draft application belonged to an LLC called Morrow Design Ventures. Melissa's married name was Morrow. Denise asked whether I had authorized any of it. I said no. She asked whether the copy of my driver's license looked genuine. It did. I felt embarrassed answering that question, as if allowing my daughter into my fireproof box had been an act of stupidity rather than trust. Denise did not treat me that way. She locked the application, placed an alert on my accounts, and told me to freeze my credit with the reporting agencies. She also said something I remember exactly. "Mr. Delaney, love and authorization are not the same thing." I called Aaron from the parking lot. He answered over the roar of a rooftop unit and said he would call back from his truck. When I explained what I had found, he was silent long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he asked whether I wanted him to come get me. I said I could drive. He asked whether Melissa had the deed. I said the original was recorded with the county and the copy was in my box. Another pause followed. "Dad," he said, "there's something I should have told you. 6 months earlier, Melissa had called him and said I was becoming confused about bills. She claimed I had paid the same insurance invoice twice and left a burner on overnight. Neither thing had happened. She told Aaron that she was trying to persuade me to move into a senior apartment and that he should not upset me by challenging the plan. Aaron had argued that I was fine, but Melissa reminded him of the property tax notice he had found and used it as evidence that I was slipping. He had paid the tax partly because he feared she might be right. "Why didn't you ask me?" I said. He sounded ashamed. "Because if she was wrong, I'd be accusing her of lying. If she was right, I'd be humiliating you. I thought I was giving you room." I leaned against my truck and looked at people pushing carts across the parking lot while my daughter's plan rearranged itself in my mind. She had not begun when the credit union called. She had been preparing both sides of the family for months. To me, she presented herself as the capable daughter protecting an aging father. To Aaron, she presented herself as the only child willing to face my decline. If I signed, he would believe it was necessary. If I objected, she could describe the objection as confusion. The part that hurt most was not the money. It was learning that she had started building a version of me in which my own judgment could be dismissed. I called a local elder law office that Denise recommended, not because I wanted to sue my daughter, but because I needed to stop anything else from moving without my knowledge. The attorney, Samuel Price, was a plain-spoken man in his late 50s, whose office sat above a hardware store and smelled faintly of dust and copier toner. He did not promise revenge, and he did not act as though every family conflict required a courtroom. He read the loan papers, the power of attorney, and the emails the credit union had provided. Then he asked me what outcome I wanted. I said I wanted my home protected, my daughter stopped, and the truth known. I did not yet know whether I wanted charges filed. Samuel said the bank would make its own fraud report, but I could decide how far to pursue the identity misuse unless more damage appeared. He helped me revoke any informal permissions Melissa might claim, send written notice that she had no authority to act for me, and place the duplex into a revocable trust with a neutral corporate trustee to take over only if two independent doctors found me unable to manage my affairs. Neither Melissa nor Aaron would control the property while I was alive. That mattered to me. I was not going to answer one child's betrayal by handing the other child a crown he had never requested. The trust required an independent appraisal and prohibited any sale to a family member, a family business, or a company in which either child had an interest. I also changed the emergency contact on my accounts and removed the spare key from Melissa's possession. Aaron drove me to the county recorder's office, but waited in the hall unless I asked him to come inside. When I told him the trust would not put him in control either, he said, "Good, it's your house." No disappointment crossed his face. That reaction was worth more to me than any promise. By Friday afternoon, the duplex was protected, my credit was frozen, and the credit union had confirmed that no money had been released. Then Samuel called with one more piece of information. Northridge Residential Holdings, the company that supposedly wanted to buy my building, had been formed 11 days earlier. Its registered mailing address matched a private mailbox Melissa used for her design studio. She owned half of it. The other half belonged to her business partner, a contractor named Seth Vance. They had planned to buy my duplex, below market value, renovate the upstairs unit through their own companies, and refinance it afterward. Melissa had not merely tried to borrow against my home. She had built a second route to take control of it if the loan failed. I sat in Samuel's office holding that page and understood why she had said, "Then we can finally do this the easy way." The easy way was getting my signature. I did not yet know what she considered the hard way. I asked Melissa to come to the duplex Saturday morning. I did not tell her Aaron would be there, and I did not tell Aaron the details of what I planned to say. He arrived first and stood in the upstairs apartment with the tenant's permission, while I waited downstairs. I wanted him close enough to hear if voices rose, but I did not want the conversation to become two against one. Melissa walked in at 10, carrying the same leather portfolio. She smiled when she saw that the power of attorney was still on the table. "I'm glad you're being sensible," she said. I asked her to sit. She reached for the document, but I placed my hand over it. "Before we discuss this," I said, "I want you to tell me who owns Northridge Residential Holdings." The color left her face in a slow, visible wave. She said she did not know what I meant. I slid the company registration across the table. She glanced at it, and then at me. "Dad, this looks worse than it is." I told her that sentence had probably saved 1,000 dishonest people from having to invent a better one. She started to explain that Northridge was only a backup plan, that the building needed repairs, and that outside investors would have taken a larger profit anyway. I asked why the credit line was connected to her business account. She froze again. I placed the loan application beside the company papers, then the fake email address, then the fraud notice. "The credit union stopped it," I said. "The duplex is now in a trust. You have no authority over my accounts, my credit, or this property. You cannot buy it through another company. You cannot represent me to a lender. You cannot tell anyone I am mentally unfit without being prepared to prove it." Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Melissa had always hated crying in front of people. She looked toward the hallway and said, "Did Aaron tell you?" I answered, "The bank told me. The county records told me. The documents you brought into this kitchen told me. Aaron told me only what you had already said about me." She whispered, "He's here, isn't he?" Aaron came down the stairs then, not triumphant, not angry in the loud way Melissa expected. He looked tired. She stared at him and said, "You had no right." He replied, "Neither did you." That was all. I told him I needed a few minutes alone with his sister, and he stepped onto the porch. Melissa sat with her arms folded and asked whether I planned to have her arrested. I said I had not made that decision. The bank had opened a fraud investigation, and I would not lie for her. If they asked whether I authorized the application, I would say no. If they asked whether she had permission to use my identification, I would say no. If they asked whether I believed it was a misunderstanding, I would say no. Then I asked the question I had been holding all week. "Why didn't you ask me for help?" Her face changed. The performance of outrage gave way to exhaustion. She looked older than 45 for the first time in my life. She said the studio had been losing money for 18 months. 2 large clients had canceled after materials were ordered. A commercial landlord had raised the rent. She had taken short-term business advances with daily withdrawals, then borrowed from one lender to cover another. Seth Vance had convinced her that my duplex could solve everything. If they controlled the property, they could borrow against the equity, renovate the upper unit, raise the rent, and repay the debt before I ever felt the difference. I wasn't going to throw you out, she said. You would have stayed downstairs. I asked whether I should be grateful that her plan allowed me to remain in my own home. She covered her face and said, I knew how it sounded, which is why I couldn't tell you. I replied, no, you knew what it was, which is why you couldn't tell me. She began crying then, quietly and angrily, as if even the tears had betrayed her. She said she had spent her entire adult life trying not to be the child who failed. Aaron could show up in dirty work boots, and everyone praised him for being dependable, while she had built a polished business and employed 6 people. When the business started collapsing, she could not bear the thought of coming to me and admitting it. Seth offered a plan that made the loss temporary. She told herself the duplex would eventually belong to her and Aaron anyway. That sentence hurt almost as much as the loan application. Eventually is not ownership, I said. Your mother and I did not spend 30 years fixing this place so our children could treat our deaths like a closing date. She flinched. I let the words sit. Then I told her what would happen next. She would give the bank a complete written account of the application. She would withdraw from Northridge and provide proof that the company had no claim against my property. She would return every copy of my identification and sign a statement acknowledging she had no authority to act for me. She would hire her own attorney and a certified debt counselor. I would not pay her business debts. I would not guarantee a loan. I would not change the trust because she cried or because I loved her. If the bank chose not to pursue criminal charges after she cooperated, I would not pressure them to do so, but I would not protect her from the consequences of what she had already done. She asked about my will. I told her it had not been rewritten that week because I refused to use inheritance as a weapon during an argument. It would be reviewed later, after I had seen what she did with the truth. So, Aaron gets everything, she said. I called him in from the porch and told both of them the same thing. Neither child was receiving the duplex while I was alive, and neither child would control it if I became ill. My estate would be handled according to written instructions by an independent trustee. Aaron looked relieved. Melissa looked confused, as though she had expected him to win because she had lost. I said, "This is not a contest between my children. This is about whether I am safe with each of you." Then I told her she had one more call to make. She needed to tell Aaron herself that I was not confused, that the stories about the stove and the double payment were false, and that she had used his concern to keep him from questioning her. She could have done it in the kitchen, but she asked to speak to him alone. They went upstairs. I heard no shouting. After 20 minutes, Aaron came down first, took his coat, and said he needed time. Melissa remained upstairs another half hour. When she finally left, she placed her key to the duplex on the table without being asked. 3 months later, on a gray Tuesday in February, Melissa came to my door carrying an envelope and no portfolio. By then, the studio had closed. She had sold the showroom inventory, ended the lease, and taken a salaried job coordinating renovations for a community college. The bank had decided not to pursue charges after she provided records, withdrew the loan request, and signed a formal admission that I had not authorized it. Seth Vance's attorney had sent a letter claiming the entire plan had been Melissa's idea, which taught her something about the kind of partner who encourages a person to risk her father's home. Northridge had been dissolved. Melissa was repaying the legal and credit monitoring costs I had incurred, not because the money would change my life, but because responsibility needed a shape. The envelope contained the first payment and a copy of her debt management agreement. She stood on the porch, waiting for me to invite her inside. I did, but the moment was not warm or cinematic. Trust does not return because snow is falling or because someone has finally brought the correct paperwork. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where she had once placed a power of attorney under my hand. She told me she had apologized to Aaron. He had listened, but had not forgiven her yet. I said he was allowed to take as long as he needed. She nodded and looked around the room. "Did you change the will?" she asked. I did not answer immediately. Her face tightened, and she said, "I'm sorry. That sounded like the old me." I told her the trust remained exactly as it was, and that my estate plans were my private business. She said she understood. Then she asked whether the upstairs bathroom still leaked near the tub. I said it did. She offered the name of a plumber from her old vendor list, but did not volunteer to manage the repair. That small restraint mattered more than she knew. We drank coffee and spoke for 40 minutes about ordinary things. When she left, she did not ask for her key back. In April, Aaron and Melissa both came for my birthday. It was the first time they had been in the same room since the confrontation. Aaron brought a replacement thermostat for the upstairs unit. Melissa brought a pie from the bakery Ruth used to like. Conversation moved carefully around us, but it moved. At one point, Melissa offered to help Aaron carry a ladder to the basement. He said he could manage. She answered, "I know. I'm asking anyway." He looked at her for a long moment, then handed her the lighter end. That was not forgiveness, but it was not nothing. By summer, she had made 6 payments and never missed one. She did not become a different person all at once. She still tried to explain too much when she was ashamed, and she still confused competence with control when she was frightened. Aaron still watched her closely. I still kept my documents locked where neither child had access. I also hired a property manager for the upstairs apartment and paid Aaron market rate when he repaired the air conditioner, because I did not want gratitude turning into another kind of invisible debt. The duplex remained mine. I planted tomatoes beside the back fence, took a train trip to Chicago with an old friend from the bus garage, and began volunteering twice a week at a vocational program for teenagers learning diesel repair. I was 69 by then, not waiting to disappear so my children could divide what remained. Melissa once asked whether I regretted testing them. I told her I regretted needing the truth, but not protecting myself after I found it. She said, "You could have confronted me the day the bank called." I answered, "And you would have told me there was a misunderstanding. I needed to see what you did when you believed I was weak." She looked down and said, "I hate that version of me." I told her hating it was useless unless she learned how she had become it. A year after the first payment, she completed the repayment plan and brought me a final receipt. I did not hand her a key, rewrite the trust, or declare everything healed. I hugged my daughter on the porch and told her I was proud that she had finished something difficult without asking me to erase the cost. She cried, and this time, she did not turn away. I loved her before the loan application, while I was freezing my credit, and after the last payment cleared. Love was never the question. The question was whether love required me to surrender my judgment, my home, or my right to be treated as a man instead of an inheritance. It did not. Forgiveness eventually opened my front door again, but it did not return the papers, passwords, or authority she had tried to take. Those remained where they belonged, with me.